Okay.
What's up, people? Okay. All right. Oh my gosh, I'm emotional already.
That's a big day.
So, welcome, Rustin.
It's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's good to see you. So, this is the choosing new podcast. So, we're catching up a little bit about what I've been up to lately.
Yeah.
And since we did a deep dive in what my life has been like the last 6 months or so.
Yeah.
I am now the porn coach on TikTok. And I've also started an organization called Choosing New.
Okay.
All right. It's I kind of based that on a Viktor Frankl quote, a Holocaust survivor.
Yep.
He wrote kind of his life's work when he was in a concentration camp. And he said, between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space lies our power to choose. And in our choice is our path to freedom.
Yeah.
And, we'll talk a little bit about here some of the times where I have had to choose something new, which is very difficult and it requires a lot of courage to do so. But I think it's worth it. And so, I look back at my life. I actually listened to one of your sermons recently, and I'll have you introduce yourself in just a second.
Sure.
You made some sort of comment to the effect of some people from my past might show up and say, man, that guy from the past was a real piece of work.
Yeah.
Right?
Be gently putting it.
Yes, gently putting it. And the same could be said about myself. And we even ran in somewhat of the same circles in college and thereafter. And so the same goes for me. It's like, I got a lot of bodies behind me that, hey, if anybody wants to come and have a conversation with me, I would welcome that.
Totally.
But what was required for me is to choose a new path in life. And so it was one of the hardest things to choose that new path. We'll talk about that in just a second. But it was so worth it.
Yeah.
And here we are today talking about how we can choose new. That's what this is about. So would you give us just a little introduction of who you are, what you do, and we'll go from there.
Yeah. My name is Rustin Rossello, currently a pastor at Scottsdale Bible Church. Primary responsibilities over there would be a decent amount of congregational care, just with people who come and go, as well as doing a decent amount of preaching over there as our teaching pastor alongside our senior pastor. So one of the things that comes up a lot is just based on even my background. I'm a recovering alcoholic, have been for about 14 years now, and that's been, again, kind of one of my choice moments was you're either going to get into this or you're going to die. And I think in addition to that, the end of that road for me came with an explosion in my marriage caused by myself with infidelity. So stepping outside of my marriage, which is even one of the things that I think you and I connected on years ago when we started to walk through that. And I'll let you cover those details. But I end up working with a lot of people I kind of refer to it as, I get a lot of the AA, and it's not Alcoholics Anonymous, though that's tied in. It's addiction and adultery. And I end up kind of ministering in a lot of that space, very much like yourself, where it's just, as a pastor, you're not necessarily a counselor and you're not necessarily a life coach. You're kind of existing in this interesting space of like, look, I'm here to kind of give guidance. And I always tell people, and I'm worth what you paid for me and I'm free. So we do a lot of that. Hey, look, I'm here as a resource. I work at a church, so they pay my salary to be available for those who come and go. And it's a sacred place to get to be, as you know, when you're in those moments where people's lives are falling apart. That is a sacred space to get to sit in them, with them in those moments. And so stirs a lot of emotion for me, because over the years, you get to be a part of that tender part of their heart. The most treasured thing someone can say to me is, hey, I've never told anybody this before. And you just sort of, there is something that washes over me in that moment to go, wow. The fact that 14 years ago, I should have been dead on a bathroom floor, and today I get to be a part of someone's treasured moment where they unveil something that they say, no, this is not something I ever thought I'd share with someone. But they're in so much pain, they really don't have a choice, because the path forward is terrifying, but it's time to choose something new. So.
Totally. And man, with what I do now, I was sharing with you a little bit with my social media, porn coach, PXRN coach. I basically just share my story. And if I had $1 for every time somebody said, I've never shared this with anybody before, and inside I go, I prepare myself to hear whatever's coming, and I also get so happy in my heart.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, this person is about to unlock something massive in their life.
The dam's about to break.
Oh, and every time I'm just like,
here we go.
Here we go.
I know.
Let's go.
There's a precious moment in the recovery through the 12 steps, and it's the step 4, we make a fearless searching moral inventory. Step 5, we share that with another. Mm-hmm. There's something, the searching fearless, that word fearless is so important because it's a terrifying thing to do. You're going to take all of your morality and dump it on, and most of our morality is immorality at that point. There's just this, collection of all of these things that we have carried, most of which produce the guilt and the shame that keep us driving into whatever our coping mechanisms are. And so the really tricky part with it is you're in this moment, and then someone sits down and they go, here's where I'm at. And anytime somebody does a 5th step with you, it always starts with the easy stuff. Then it starts to get into the tough stuff. And then once we get to the bottom of the barrel, there's always that one thing that's sitting down there. And when they finally, with both hands and all of the strength they have, hoist it to the top and lay it in front of you, there's like a don't move moment where you just go, don't make any sudden moves. Don't make any facial expressions. Don't for a second miss the weight of this moment.
Yeah.
Because if you so much as blink the wrong way, you're going to send this person into a spiral. And you really are. You are leaning on this concept of like, God, I really need you to move for me right now so that I can respond to this person how you would respond, which is with grace and love.
Yeah.
And again, you're not even feeling anything bad. You just don't even want to accidentally portray shock, awe, no big deal. Like, even in trying to comfort them, like, oh, you could take their biggest thing and make it seem completely meaningless. That space is a sacred space.
Yep.
So
absolutely, man. Yeah, and even like when I think of one of my tells is like raising an eyebrow.
Yeah.
If I raise an eyebrow in just the wrong way, it could, they could just shut down.
Riskiest game of poker you've ever played.
Exactly.
So
yeah. All right. So in the spirit of choosing new and sharing stories and kind of opening that dam, right? I've been very public about my story for about the last 6 months.
Yeah, for sure.
Since I chose to become a social media influencer.
Right.
It's just a choice.
Totally.
Who knows? You just decide one day.
Yeah. Welcome to life in the open.
Yeah. And so I've been clean now for 6 years. Tomorrow is the 6-year anniversary of when I disclosed to my wife not only of my 20-year-long porn addiction, but also my multiple infidelities. Yeah. And I was reflecting on this yesterday on TikTok. I was like, I actually don't know which was harder, telling her or telling you on the Monday prior. Yeah. So it was Monday the 14th of 2017. So I went to a marriage workshop. My wife and I did. We thought our marriage was just fine. We're like, yeah, maybe we can learn a thing or two.
All good.
Everything's good. Yeah, whatever. And go to this marriage workshop, and I quickly realized, oh my gosh, things are not good. And it was over the course of that weekend I decided, I chose that I was going to tell her. I was going to disclose this. But I had no idea how.
Yeah.
And I think that the path to any transformational process, you have to name it, you have to refuse to judge whatever behavior it is, and then you got to choose something new.
That's good.
Name the reality of what's going on, don't judge it, choose something new. So I named it there. It's very hard to not judge it, and then I chose something new, which the decision I made that weekend was, I have no idea how to disclose this to my wife. She was 8 months pregnant, by the way, with our second.
I remember.
Yeah, and I thought, I need help.
Yeah.
So who can I call? And I thought I can call Rustin.
Yeah.
Because Rustin shared his story about 5 years prior or so, 5-6 years.
Yeah.
And so Monday morning, I'll never forget, I drive into work, go to the parking garage, sit there, it's about 8 o'clock, 8:30, take a deep breath, call you, say, hey, Rustin, I got a problem.
Yeah. I remember where I was sitting.
Yeah. I said, okay, what's up? And I said, well, been cheating on my wife, been looking at porn for 20 years. She has no idea. And you said, at least what I remember, you said, all right, great. Basically like, welcome to the next chapter of your life.
Yeah.
And that was so hard to do,
Yeah.
to tell another human being of all the guilt and shame that I was carrying.
Yeah.
And so again, I don't know which was harder, telling you or telling my wife, because telling the first person is so hard, but then obviously telling my wife, who I betrayed and hurt so badly, was so difficult. We just had a moment. She just went to lunch. She'll probably be back here soon, but just said, hey, 6 years tomorrow. She's like, wow, we've come a long ways. So anyway, so the importance of sharing our stories is, I think, really important. And again, what I do now on social media, on TikTok with my Porn Coach brand, is really just sharing my story and drawing people into something new. And my hope is that I can inspire some sort of change, some sort of declaration to choose a new action and a more healthy behavior in life.
Yeah.
So I'd like to ask you, right, the catalyst, or one of the catalysts for me to disclose to you was you had shared your story.
Yeah, that's right.
And my question is, really, it's broader, but why do you do what you do?
I think there's there's a couple of things. One, I had bumped into some foundational realities as I started to heal, as I started to look at some, which again, that process can happen really quick. There was a tremendous amount of healing for you that existed between I got to make this call and the end of the call. Like finding those safe places to tell your story almost pre-exists the telling itself. So I think when you talk to people about, like when I talk about, well, why, I had to find safe places. Before I told my wife, the very first step I took was to walk into an AA meeting. Little did I know, a room full of 100 strangers at 7 a.m. would end up being a very safe place, because this recovery community was like, you're in the right spot. And I mean, for the rest of my life, had nothing to do with my adultery. It had everything to do with my guilt and my shame and my brokenness, walking into a room of people that seemed to be so okay not being okay. And I'll never forget walking into that room, at 6:55 that morning. A 150-year-old woman patted me on the back, just bright orange hair, and her name's Suzanne. I don't think she's alive anymore. And she just said, come on in, we won't bite. And I just remember going, oh gosh, it's that obvious that I'm new, that I belong here. And at the end of the meeting, a guy walked up. I went through the whole meeting, had never done it before. So, they asked the famous question, is this anybody's first AA meeting? And I was like, so I'm not going to get to just sit here. I mean, you talk about, at any point, has your arm ever weighed 100 pounds? That's the moment. And so, off you go, you do all that. And a guy walked up, his name's Steve. I still see him in meetings from time to time. And he patted me on the back and he goes, hey man, we'll see you tomorrow. And I just said, oh, is this not like a once a week thing? And Steve goes, I don't know. How often did you drink? And I said, every day. And all he said was, we'll see you tomorrow. And it was like, shoot, like I'm in. And I think that moment for you was what both hit the relief valve and increased the pressure all at once, because you were out, right? Like this was unhideable. You had pushed a ball down a hill and it was going to keep rolling. And at that point you had a choice. You're like, I'm either going to have to gag order Rustin or I've got to walk this thing out. It's the moment where like you jump out of the plane and your only hope is that God's goodness is your parachute. Like, can you guide me to the ground safely? Because right now I'm in a free fall. And so for me, finding the safe place, telling the story, I mean, my disclosure to my wife happened at her. I mean, she showed up in my office that afternoon. So I went to my first AA meeting and she showed up and just said, something happened, because all of my infidelity happened the weekend preceding that Monday morning. And she said, something's happened and you're going to tell me what it is right now. Walked into my office, closed the door. And I said, okay, well, I didn't go to a Bible study like I told you I did this morning. I went to my first AA meeting, and I'm an alcoholic. And I'd never said it out loud. And it was true. It was that moment where you said something horrifying and then found out it was true. And that all happened at once. And then what devastated me is she looked at me and said, oh, Rustin, I'm so proud of you. And I just said, before you go getting all proud of me, why don't we talk about what me being an alcoholic in our marriage has been for the last 2.5 years at that point? And so as we started to walk it through, it felt like it took 1.5 years. It took about probably 1.5 minutes before she said, have you ever cheated on me? And that was the time where I got to answer the question and say, I have.
Yeah.
And I just immediately started backpedaling, not from the statement, but from her having to stay here.
Yeah.
And just said, you should go. You should run. You should get as far away as you can from me, because I have been a terrible husband. You've been an incredible wife to me. I've caused you nothing but pain for the last 2.5 years. And I don't know what it's going to take to get me sober. Run. Mm-hmm. And the most profound moment in my life was when my wife looked over at me and said, okay, where do you want me to go? You're all I have. And then followed it up with, I don't know what we'll look like when this is over, but we're going to get you healthy and we're going to get through this. Mm-hmm. And it was such a brilliant balance of her own boundaries of like, I'm not saying this will still be this, because I don't know what just happened. And it was honest, but at the same time, there was grace in it that like, I'm going to try and walk this out with you, though I don't even know what that means yet. And what hit me, so this will be my own personal faith in kind of raw form, but I'd grown up in church, so the whole concept of Jesus for me was around. And I mean, as a pastor, that's where I am. But I think what hit me so profoundly in that moment was I had had a very distant, disinterested relationship with Jesus. And he had always been I had to perform so that he and I were in relationship together. What I had missed for all my years was the beauty of the cross, his performance so that we could be, that he did the performing. And in that moment, what that blocked me from is I never really saw God's goodness, his grace, his love. So I'd never had to experience unmerited, undeserved grace and forgiveness. That had always been excluded because I was doing all the work. Mm-hmm. I'm the one performing.
Yeah,
you're the one who's sitting in heaven getting all the benefit, which is just so silly. But yet, when you look at that framework, it makes a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. So what had happened in that moment for me, when I experienced this moment with my wife and saw this unbelievable, unmerited grace and forgiveness, this love that I could not explain, what clicked for me after 27 years on planet Earth, if this is what God's kids are capable of when it comes to love and forgiveness, I really do believe that Jesus Christ might be the God of my wildest dreams. Mm-hmm. So when you talk about why do you do what you do, the reason I'm a pastor, the reason I continue, you're going to point people towards whatever it is
towards something, yeah,
affected your life. I mean, that's it. And for me, that was the impact. That was the profound moment. I experienced Jesus through my wife. Now follow it out from there. Well, that's great, but why tell your story? I think there's this reality that not everybody's called to tell their story at the level I do or the level you do. Mm-hmm. My story's been disclosed in
many times,
sermons and
and I've been telling people recently too. I'd say like, look, you have to go start talking about this.
Yeah,
you don't have to do what I do.
No,
you don't need to go create a TikTok account, but you got to go tell at least one person what's going on.
That's right. And I think the freedom in that is guilt and shame thrive in isolation. Mm-hmm. And so, only what we let go gets released. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. I mean, it's the most logical statement in the world. But if you aren't willing to let it go, it's still going to have power over you. Doesn't mean it's everybody, but you have to find those. That's why I said, like, it's a pre-step to telling your story is find that safe place. Mm-hmm. Find that counselor, find that friend, find that family member. Find that safe place with that person which again, this was why it was so big for me, that you'll receive that love and that care and that grace. I ended up finding it in the very woman who I had betrayed, which was profoundly unexpected. Mm-hmm. But we started walking it out. So I think the healing in that is I don't have to carry it alone. So like one of my AA buddies, he says, every time I have a problem, I bring it to someone and my problem is a pie. When I share it with somebody, I cut it in half, and they sort of share that load. Mm. Now I've got half a pie. The next person I talk to about it, I cut it in half, and I cut it in half, and pretty soon I've got a sliver that I can manage. Mm-hmm. And I always liked when Bob said that to me because his sharing of that was not like I'm just verbally vomiting my problems on everyone, but I have safe, strong places that know it's not their job to fix it. When we sit down and we share a problem, I'm not expecting someone to fix it. I just need someone to be in it with me and understand that I'm hurting. That's the seen part of our story. And, different writers will call it seen, safe, secure, all these different...
Seen, known, and loved. That's what I say.
Yeah, right. So you're seen, you're known, and what you're experiencing in the process, it may not even be agreement, but it's love. And love and agreement, I've always said from the pulpit, like, agreement can't be the prerequisite to love. Otherwise, we don't even love ourselves. The reality, you can be in radical disagreement and still be in a loving relationship with someone. I think it's actually one of the things that culture's lost the ability to do, and why we're so radically polarized on so many different issues is because unless we agree with each other, nobody's acting in love. So we've lost the ability to disagree in loving ways. So civil discourse is completely eroded.
Gone.
To this place where it's like, where do you stand on this issue? Great, you're out. Where do you stand on this issue? Great, you're out. And it's actually, I think, part of the reason we live such unintegrated lives internally is because we don't even agree with ourselves day to day.
Yeah.
So we have this dichotomy going on inside of us of like, I don't like me because I can't figure me out. And you go, okay, what if being in perfect agreement wasn't the goal? What if experiencing love and grace, biggest counseling question you'll ever hear, can you be kind to yourself? It's probably one of the, like you said, to be seen, to be known, to be loved. It's kindness. Can you function in kindness internally? And so I think when you flow it all the way out, finding those safe places, telling those stories, for me, what it ended up being, it just ended up being a place where, because I was able to share my story, and again, I've been doing this for 14 years now, so my story's been shared in small environments, bigger environments. Well, pretty soon, the environments became the thousands.
Yep.
And now you were like, okay, well, now we're in a little bit of a different space, but it didn't happen overnight.
Totally.
And so I think there's so much freedom in starting to share those stories and realizing, okay, in most cases, I'm not alone. I think, like I said, the worst of human emotions thrive in darkness.
Yep. Shame festers in the darkness, but it can't stand being spoken to the light.
That's right.
And you got to, I love saying it, name the shame, baby.
Yeah.
Just name the shame.
Right.
Start there.
Yeah.
Just say what it is.
Yeah, because otherwise it's going to continue, it'll repeat its behavior.
Yeah.
Whatever that shame is attached to, it'll keep repeating it. Because shame so often operates akin to hopelessness.
Yeah.
And the hopelessness is, I'll never be out of this. So the shame just keeps a cycle. That's why they call them shame cycles. It's well, because it's never going to be fixed, I'm just going to stay in it.
Yep.
So that's
all right. So man, the D-Day, the disclosure day, when you confessed the infidelity to your spouse, which I did as well. I still can't fathom how and why my wife stayed.
Yeah.
Like, I get it, right? We've reconciled, we worked through it all, but it's like, it's just mind blowing to me.
Yeah.
How, and this is like, I deal with so many people, men typically, who have committed infidelity, and their wife is and wants to be there with them and stand with them to fight through it.
Sure.
And it's one of the most beautiful things that I see, even though it's in the midst of a big mess.
Totally.
Right? But it's like, gosh, that the love that is required, and to submit your own selfish desires in that point.
Right.
For everything to be perfect.
Yep.
It's like, wow. My story was similar in like, mine, it wasn't just me confessing infidelity. It was like, oh my gosh, I'm a terrible person.
Yeah,
and
I know exactly how you feel.
Yeah. And again, I grew up in the church as well.
Yep.
And I thought I was, this picture perfect Christian boy. Yeah. I thought I had everyone fooled.
Right.
But, occasionally I'll ask people that knew me back in the day, hey, what did you think of me back then?
Yeah.
They're like, man, you were real.
Yeah.
But it's like submitting and humbling, being to a place of humility where you can say, hey, look, I've done it wrong. What I say is, I'm a sinner. There is a Savior. His name is Jesus. I got to start walking that path.
Yeah.
What he has to offer. And it's, so far, for 6 years, it's been a much better path of freedom, right? But it started by just naming what was going on and bringing it to light in community.
Yeah.
So, all right, so it's been 14 years for you, 6 years for me.
Yeah.
Again, this is not addiction and recovery podcast.
Yeah.
This is about choosing new.
Yeah.
So again, you do what you do. Really, what I'm hearing is to offer hope to people through your story.
Right.
Yeah. So How do you walk that out? Like, give us a glimpse into how you walk that out now in your professional life.
Yeah. Even the functionality of my recovery program, I don't get to sponsor as many people as I used to. So that's what's a little tricky is, I used to have anywhere from, 1 to 4 sponsees at any given time. You're working, you're discipling. My world has just gotten to a trickier place now where I don't get to be a lot of people's what I call living room for recovery, meaning you're doing the work, you're on the couch, you're sitting there going back and forth. I just don't get to be a lot of people's living room, but I'm a lot of people's front door. So I end up having a lot of those initial, how do you know if you're an alcoholic, conversations with people. And I end up being kind of that catalyst into the recovery life or into marriage restoration or into spiritual restoration. And I think the way that I have kind of seen it evolve is to a place now where with a little bit of a public exposure, I'm in front of thousands of people whenever I preach. I just sort of, all right, Lord, you send who you know needs it. I mean, it's kind of the work with the willing and at the same time. And there's some people who, will kind of say, hey, can I meet with Rustin? And it just may not be a good fit. Like I just tell people, I'm not a family counselor, right? I'm not a family mediator. I don't give legal advice. I really do try to stay in my lane. And then, I send clients your way just because I'm like, gosh, I can't disciple. Like the week to week life coaching, discipleship. I'm a lot of people's MASH unit. Like we're going to get in here. We're going to do the early trauma work. I'll meet with you once, maybe twice, but you got to get to people to get to do the heavy lifting. And that's what I had to do. I had to go sit. I mean, gosh, we lived in counseling. We still live in counseling just because that heavy lifting kind of has to work that way. So I end up almost being that spark plug that tries to really give people the, look, I get it. There's a lot of people I always say like, my couch is the last stop on the block. Nobody wants to show up on my couch. And again, not like I'm reeling them in there, but I had a guy sit down yesterday, just on such a kind man, and he was hurting. And he showed up, and it was kind of, I think my wife made the appointment. I go, so you were sent to the principal's office? He just kind of, well, no, I didn't mean that. It was a great meeting. We had an unbelievable time, and he had some great breakthrough. But again, you just kind of like, that's my window. And right now, you kind of end up, what is the highest and best use? And I do my best to, I've got a couple of guys that I directly work with because that's good for my soul.
You have to stay in it.
Yeah. Otherwise, if you're just the talking head on the stage, if I'm not shepherding in some way, shape, or form, I feel myself dry up. And so there's some guys I directly work with, I go deep with, I kind of try to do those things. But I start to feel some of those pieces come to life in me when I'm working with others. And like I said, sometimes it's a one-off meeting, sometimes it's a longer lasting relationship. I do tend to attract people who know how to utilize a nuke in their life. They've put the hammer down and there is nothing but a mushroom cloud left.
Blow it up.
And I think the Lord has kind of equipped me with some grace and some patience to really walk through life with those individuals. So it kind of varies, but in a lot of cases, I end up being kind of that, there's that place where on a train track, you pull the lever and it changes tracks to, I end up being that little confluence of people drive in, this one needs this and maybe some other materials, this one needs this one. So I almost end up being kind of a networker to just help connect people to an Austin for life coaching, to a counselor for specific, sometimes it's getting people into 28-day programs. And to be honest, you need to remove yourself from society for a month. Can you do it, effectively? Do you have the balls to make that decision? Because I love you and I'd love to see you get the help you need. And I think those are the places where you really start to see it take traction. And boom, and all of a sudden they're off and they're running. So
yeah, man, it's I do charge for my services now, right? Because I'm a life coach. I started that practice, but something I've been saying lately is like, I may be a piece of the puzzle to your recovery journey. right? Like, look, I'm not going to pretend like I've got all the answers. I actually have very few answers.
Yeah.
My job as a coach is to listen and ask good questions.
Right.
Right. And maybe that would be complemented with a therapist or counselor or 12-step program. But I think, again, I like that kind of traffic cop analogy. I think I do that a lot too, because when people see my videos on TikTok, they're like, oh my gosh, this guy's saying something that nobody else will.
Right.
Even though there's lots of other people saying it. Right. When the student is ready, the teacher will present themselves.
That's right.
And then it's like, great, can I be in this journey with you?
Yeah.
And sometimes it's a call that they have a 30-minute call with me, and then they're like, all right, I'm going to go find something else.
That was great.
Great.
Yep.
Other times it's like, can I have 4 hours every day from you? And I'm like, well, no, you can't.
Yeah. You get asked on both sides.
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah. So, okay. So we're live right now on TikTok, by the way. So for those of you out there, if you do have questions, we'll kind of wait till the end to take those. But I just want to let you know this is live with Rustin Rossello here. All right. So I have noticed I haven't watched all of your content in the last 10 years, right?
Nor would I expect you.
And you probably haven't rewatched it that much.
Yeah.
My experience of what you've been sharing lately, because I do, periodically I'll see what you're up to. What I've experienced from you lately is you've been sharing more and more vulnerably, at least from what I've heard. And I might be wrong on that, because I don't watch everything you put out. But if that's true, why is that?
Yeah.
And what's your motive with that? And let me just say, I feel like every time I go watch something of yours, you are like super vulnerable. Whereas before, it might have been more theological or pastoral.
Yeah, I think there's probably a couple of layers to that. One, and again, some of this is silly, but I've settled in a little bit. The church has put me in a position as the teaching pastor, where now I probably feel a little more alongside our senior pastor, a requested ownership. They've asked me, hey man, we want you to feel like when you're up here, this is your place to be able to preach from. And I think, and our senior pastor and I were having some reflection over the summer, just because I got done with 7 out of the last 9 weeks being on stage. And he had just said, boy, it really felt this summer like it was yours. You were really in command of the room, and that it felt like it was your stage. And he said, because him and I are not competitive in the way that we go about our teamwork together in the teaching calendar, he just said, I was really proud of you. That felt really, really good. So I think some of what you've been sensing just in my own personal development, which feels silly to talk about, has been a comfort level with the fact that this is me settling into my speaking style. I think in addition to that, you find certain places to share certain details.
Yeah.
Everybody kind of generally understands the story, but even this last week, to be able to share some of the specifics around, hey, some of the details at the end of my story, this is kind of a quote from that sermon, happened in my home. And there was some restoration needed.
Man, the praying room to room you shared, gosh, that was cool.
Yeah, which was a moment for me. I still to this day remember when she told me that. Hey, they're going to come, my small group, and they're going to go room to room, and they're going to pray for our home because some not so great things have happened in our home. And I just remember feeling the weight of my behavior in a way that was shameful. I knew God was in it, but it was just weight. It wasn't even spinning me. I was just weight. It was just the heaviness of what I'd been so oblivious to. And then in that situation, that group of women who had supported my wife for 2.5 years. So I would just say, like, some of it is, God's really good in what he stirs and when he stirs it. And those pieces, I think, are why some of the vulnerability will bubble up in different places. As a speaker, you always have a little bit of a fear of, like, I don't want it to feel like I'm just talking about myself because that's not, so it's a balance of making sure that in my case for what my public speaking is, that I'm still making, I'm expositing the text, I'm taking the scriptures apart in a healthy way, providing the context that's necessary, but still able to share certain things that, any illustration is designed to bring people into the information, to make it real. the best example of that is Jesus. He just used brilliant teaching examples to look around and go, I don't know, you guys see the birds? You guys see the trees? You guys see the grass, the flowers of the field? Nobody provides for them. God's got you too. So it's some of those things where I think that's a very healthy speaking style and approach. But I think those are the things that lately, the level of comfort, having some specific things stirred to the surface, and honestly, they're not even not all of them aren't even personal, but because of what church culture has been for the last 50 years, it's a passing comment to say, guys, one of the things I learned, because this happens from time to time, what's coming to mind right now is one of the things I learned years ago in AA. Now, that's a non-event for me.
Yeah.
But for church culture at large, and to be honest, at this point, it's a non-event for our church.
Yeah.
That's a huge blessing to the culture, specifically at where I get to minister, because we've had a chance over the last 15 years, as our senior pastor's been there, heavy grace, understanding of God's love, and it's paved the way for an adulterous alcoholic to become a pastor.
Yeah.
And that's been the brilliance of what he's done in teaching grace. Is a passing comment about being in recovery doesn't nuke the room anymore, because they're like, Rustin's been in recovery for years.
Yeah.
And so quoting the big book, or, one of the things that AA taught me years ago was, it still feels like a cultural, but it feels like a cultural refreshing rather than what just happened. There's no stigma around that anymore, because we've created a tremendous amount of permission for people to be honest, and you just keep trying to open those areas up. You can be honest, and we don't want you to stay stuck. That's always the blend that I think is so hard, is church culture in general in America is really struggling, because the older framework and thinking tends to move people in the direction of if there's sin, and there are certain things that require longer seasons of like recovery and things like that, but if there's sin, we gotta get rid of it. We gotta move
tuck it away.
We gotta clean this place up. And so a lot of our churches look like museums. And the beauty of a little bit of where we are is, because people are starting to get more open, get more honest, find higher levels of authenticity, our churches are starting to look more like hospitals.
Yep.
And people are getting healthy.
Yep.
Because to your point, they're able to be seen, they're able to be known, they're able to be loved. And some of those performance pieces are starting to erode away. Furthest thing from perfect, right? We're all human beings, it's all falling apart. But I think that's starting to be a cultural reality.
Yeah, I think we've really seen that, in the last 3 years or so, where people are craving and wanting healing. I love the church as a hospital analogy. It's like, that's what it should be.
Yeah.
This is not a place where everyone's perfect, because nobody's perfect.
Right, totally.
Somebody asked me the other day on TikTok, they said, does creating content online, speaking out against porn, does it help you stay clean? I'm like, absolutely.
Yeah.
Right? Like if I
Stakes
was
have never
using,
been higher.
yeah, the stakes are, that's exactly it. The stakes are high.
Right.
Like, I can't relapse. I can, right? I'm not saying I'm
it's
invincible,
possible.
but it's like, if I do, oh my gosh, I'm a total sham.
Right.
Right. And again, having that humility to say, no, I'm not perfect. I was thinking about the other day, because in the church, historically, I think one of those issues would be the homosexual issue, or now, LGBTQ. I was just thinking, the percentage of homosexuals in this country, I think, it's south of 5%, right, roughly. So I don't know exactly what it is.
I've heard the same stat. But
Yeah, south of 5%. The percentage of regular porn users or people addicted to porn, however you want to qualify that, in and out of the church is about 60%.
Right.
I don't know what the data is on alcoholism.
Yeah.
It's probably more than 5%.
Right.
The church has given so much attention
Yeah.
to the homosexual issue.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, let's pretend like nobody here is an adulterous alcoholic.
Right. That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
So how do you see, with regard to the church,
Yeah.
I don't know what the right question is. What threats do you see facing in the church? However you want to answer that, right? Or maybe like, what gives you hope as you're leading and guiding a church?
Yeah.
What are you wanting to inspire in people
Yeah.
to choose a new path for their life?
Yeah. So many directions we could go.
So many.
So I'll try and curtail this to some categories that I actually am not even aware of yet. So let's walk through this together. I think one of the things that's been really hard in the past is the lack of authenticity.
Yeah.
Right. So, and some of that's generational. Just what we place emphasis on is what sort of we build around. And so the truth is really kind of that cornerstone. And I think one of my passions in the years to come, and without going into a 20-minute generational breakdown, I think for a lot of the older generations, truth was, it kind of drifted from important to the most important to the only.
Yeah.
And so authenticity took a really big hit. And I think for the church to exist as that healing hospital that it needs to be, authenticity, right, has to come up to the level of truth. And here's the reason we're seeing some of the things we're seeing from a church culture standpoint right now is we're doing an exhaustive flip, an exclusive flip, because truth has had its day. Now it's, well, that didn't help us. So now we're swinging to authenticity, but without an anchor on the truth. And so now you're seeing kind of this deconstructing reality where everyone's like, well, the truth clearly took us apart and authenticity reigns supreme. So unless I know it's real and it matters, I don't want anything to do with it.
Yeah. Could you give a quick definition of truth in the context you're
Yeah, so in a church context, which again, that's the framework I'm working in here, I'm speaking about a specific culture specific to the church. As an example, let's use the church as an example, probably a better way to approach it. For the church in an evangelical framework, the Bible would be a truth, right? It's the truth that we stand on. So for years, it was just sort of like it was the Bible and its truth, preached and understood. And if you learned it, you were set. But when the lack of authenticity came, now you have what you said earlier. Now you have a sham because nobody's being honest. Nobody's talking about the fact that they're fallen. Most pastors are presenting as, you guys need to do this. You guys need to do this. There's no authenticity from the pulpit, and there's no authenticity from the people. Mm-hmm. When there's no pulpit, people, everybody's performing. Mm-hmm. So now you have this hypocrisy and this legalism. We have this just total hypocritical thing that Christians have been donned with for years. That's what we have carried. Well, when you start to raise the level of authenticity, which is the only way it can exist, when what is true and what is real start to collide, you get restoration. Mm-hmm. When you just have what is real, but you don't have the anchor of truth, now you create your own truth. And the problem is, and this is one of the things that's super challenging. When you talk about like what's challenging in the church, it's the performance, hide your sin. When you talk about what's challenging in culture outside the church, you have a totally different reality. And here's what that reality is. Nobody needs to change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're fine as you are.
The biggest problem we have is that everybody else is telling you that you need to change, and nobody needs to change.
Yeah.
Which then starts to go, okay, well, that's fine if that's where you want to stay. But now there's no cultural reality saying we have sort of an agreed upon morality, right? So those things get thrown out. Okay, I can run with that. We're now waiting for life to get painful enough for people to finally go, you know what? The lie that culture's been telling me, which is that my biggest problem is that everybody else is telling me that I'm like, that this is wrong. That I don't think that's real. Mm-hmm. I'm actually hurting, mm-hmm. and I need more. I need something to actually stand on. So for as irrelevant as the church has been rendered during this season, particularly over the last 10 to 15 years, the church has really been sequestered off to, you guys are kind of antiquated idiots that mm-hmm. really don't know what you're doing, which I can handle that accusation. I can live in that reality, be okay. We're getting a lot of people who culture has chewed up and spit out. Like a life outside of the church really didn't turn out the way they wanted it to. And they're kind of coming back and going, I can't just do the performance anymore. Yeah. It has to be authentic. It has to be real. So there's a vulnerability to both sides. Hey, everybody's fine. Leave everyone alone. Let them live their life, which I'm actually okay. Mm-hmm. No problem. What breaks my heart is when specific issues that are breaking people's hearts, regardless of what they are or regardless of how culture feels about them, people are now saying, that's a great thing. live in that, go after that.
Yeah.
And you're going to be just great, but don't ever let someone tell you need to change. In some ways I look at it and I go, when we take healing off the table in an area, regardless of what the area is, I'm intentionally leaving all the specifics alone because there's just no reason to step on any of the landmines. We have people who've come back to the church after walking out of, the LGBTQ community. And when they've come back, they said it was really hard because in an older church model, where grace was really hard to get to, when those individuals who, let's just say in a specific, they'd chosen to lead a gay lifestyle, the church had shunned them and sent them out, which I just think is heartbreaking. Okay, so they leave. They live freely in the LGBTQ community. And then what one of the guys who had come back to church had said was, well, as soon as I didn't agree with that community, they chewed me up and spit me out just as fast.
Yeah.
So it's always one of those things where you just go to our earlier point, agreement, right?
Totally.
It's the only way that people feel loved.
And that's not unique to the gay community.
It's not unique to
it
the
could
church.
Be the porn community, the alcoholic community, the drug community.
It's super unique to humans.
Yes.
So wherever humans exist, that reality exists.
It's a common human experience.
That's right.
Yeah.
So you look at all these pieces, you look at this, you look at that. So I think that whole, that polarity, right? Where you're just like, what does the church say? Perform and be perfect. Okay. What does culture say? Don't perform at all. And if anybody tells you that there's something that is solid, absolute truth, run from them because you are exactly fine. I think the blend between these two, the way the church has existed historically as a performance entity and the way that culture says don't perform at all, is the middle that says there is truth, you are accepted, you are seen, you are known, you are loved, and there's a better way towards human flourishing. Mm-hmm. There's restoration, there's healing. And that's what I said this in a sermon recently. Everybody wants to change. You imagine being with anybody that you go, do you want to be exactly the way you are in 10 years?
Yeah.
Of course not. Everybody wants to grow. They're just afraid of growth.
Yeah.
And I think that piece is a big part of it. So there's that construct. I think the other thing, and this is, I'll speak specifically to church, I think one of the biggest things, and by the way, I identify with this. This is huge in my life. The difference between hearing and doing. So this will go back to kind of your synapse in the middle. So this is a book I really like, just to give everybody this is a guy named Martin Schlesky. Okay. He wrote this beautiful book. It's The Sound of Life's Unspeakable Beauty. Now, disclaimer, it is a Christian book, but I think a lot of the principles, even if you happen to be a Bible burning atheist, I think there's still a lot of really beautiful stuff in here towards a spirituality in general. So don't discount it necessarily for that. But he's in a section in this particular spot where he's talking about hearing and doing, and he says this. He says, hearing and doing form a powerful set of spiritual strengths. As in any resonance, one strength begets the other. The pitfall of hearing that does not result in action is intellectualism. The pitfall of action that does not feel the need to listen is pragmatism. So I was doing some journaling this morning, and I realized, for me, so many times, what I can get stuck in is that hopeless, passive intellectualism. I go around and I curate knowledge, mm-hmm. right? And as long as I have the cure, I can put it in my life, my little spiritual medicine cabinet, close the door, and just look at the mirror of what's going on and not act.
Yeah.
I am not a ready, fire, aim guy. I'm a ready, aim. It'll be, and all of a sudden I'll sit there and I'm like, gosh, why am I still? Well, Russ, God gave you a nudge on this one 2 months ago. You've had the solution. You've had the counseling appointments. The revelation has occurred, and you're just sitting on gold, mm-hmm. right? Like, the antibiotics, the chemo is in the cabinet. Act. And I think that's your synapse, right?
Totally.
Between choice.
And I say courage. It requires courage.
Absolutely.
Right? Like, you have to enter into something uncomfortable and risky, and you don't know what it's going to look like. In order to do that, you need courage. I say frequently with, counseling or therapy, and it's great. I do it. I go on and off with it.
Yeah.
I recommend it to people.
You bet.
What it tends to do is psychoanalyze the past ad nauseum to create awareness. Awareness is a good thing.
Totally.
We need awareness.
Yeah.
Right? As a coach, the past is important. We got to get that on the table, but where are we going with this?
Yeah.
How can we use that to produce new action?
Right.
And again, it's that balance.
Right.
If you go ready, fire, aim, you're going to be a disaster.
Totally.
But if you stay in that ready, aim,
yeah.
what are you up to?
Yeah.
Right?
I have a dear friend. I'll read this to you. He's just the best, and obviously none of you know who he is, so this is safe to share. But I had shared, and again, the best way to define what I find myself stuck in is passivity. Passivity is not an unwillingness to move. That's obstinance. Passivity is a slowness to move. You know the right answer. It's time for action. I'm going to either drag my feet or not even get out of the chair.
Yeah.
So he had said this to me. He said, what makes our friendship so special is how much I relate, despite how different we can be sometimes. He says, I'm the guy who goes in for an oral surgeon about a gum issue for an initial analysis. He tells me what is wrong and how invasive the surgery will be. My next question is, how fast? After a quick negotiation, we were able to squeeze the surgery in that day. My brain goes, great, it's fixed. A few hours later, I'm in extreme pain and on painkillers with no recovery, let alone how to get home. And again, he's one of my dearest friends. And he said, now in this walk with the Lord, it is learning to accept the acceptance of being on God's timeline. Because when I intervene, especially with the mindset to fix, the outcome is usually more painful. And I think that's just the part for me where I had journaled this morning, and I recognize this spectrum for me between, on one far end, passivity, on the other far end, compulsion, right? And never really, because I'll have days where I'm just like, that's it. I am taking the bull by the horn, and all of a sudden I'll have a day, but I get to 10 o'clock at night and I'm like panting because I've lapsed completely over. Would have been great to do 3 of these tasks.
Yeah,
well, now it's 10. I did 6 and I can't breathe. And I think somewhere between my passivity and my compulsion, again, I'm still an addict, right? So I still behave like an addict, even though I'm on stage preaching sermons. I'm a super broken guy and still working that direction. But between this passivity and this compulsion exists, and I wrote it this way, it's this discerning action. And I think that's the place where I long to be more mature. What my maturity looks like in my head, my scope and my vision for myself in the future, what do these goals look like, are just a more discerning, patient, calm version of myself, because I'm either compulsed or I'm passive.
Yeah.
But to learn to kind of live between the 4 and the 7 on that reality, oh man, that's the dream. And, sometimes I just won't get off my butt long enough to go after it.
Well, it's all about nuance, right?
Yeah.
Like you can't be at either extreme.
Right.
You got to figure out how to live in the middle. With what you were talking about earlier, with like the kind of the right and wrong in the church, which kind of ties into what action are we producing? How do we do that?
Yeah.
It was said to me recently. I think historically a lot in the church in like the last 50 years, it's right, wrong. Where are we at with regard to right and
real
wrong?
black and white.
And are we on the right side of that or the wrong side, and you're either in or you're out? But instead, it's like, okay, well, what about if we look at it, are we creating experiences of life and love or of death and destruction?
Yeah.
And somewhere in the middle of all of this, right, wrong, life, death, right? I think Jesus calls us into how can we produce more love?
Yeah.
And so when we look at action, taking action, right, you can fall into passivity or hyper doing.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, what are you looking to produce?
Right.
So what would you say, like if you were speaking to the church, which you do frequently from time to time, what is kind of like your summation of like, what are you calling people into for the sake of the world? What action are you hoping is distilled by what you're preaching?
So I recently, again, I'll reference another book, which, by the way, I'm famous for reading anywhere from 25 to 40% of any book. And then, so I'm not a phenomenal finisher when it comes to literature. But I read a little bit of this one, so I'll recommend it. It's called Real Life, A Christianity Worth Living Out. And it's really a fascinating, it's written in kind of an allegory for the first 60 to 70%. And it's by a guy named James Chung. And he says, he basically creates this story where a millennial tech coder is working. He writes code, and you would know the exact phrase.
Been there.
What is this? And so I don't even know what that job title would be. But he's working for a tech company. He's working directly for a Gen Xer. The Gen Xer, both are Christians. And so this millennial comes to him and goes, I just found out you were a Christian. I've been praying that God would give me a Christian boss. Will you disciple me? And this Gen Xer is like, I don't even know what to do with you, man. And so he goes to his baby boomer friend, who's a very affluent female that runs a college ministry on a campus. And they have this conversation that is fascinating because it kind of takes the generational gaps. He's like, why do I not understand this kid? This is so bizarre to me. And it takes the boomers, the Gen Xers, the millennials, and then what is iGen or Gen Z that's coming out, that basically is last of which is being born this year in 2023. And it breaks them all down. And it basically runs through formative realities within each generation that boils down to, over reduction can always be a little dangerous, but I think this is really good. It boils each generation down to what was their key spiritual question. It's really cool. But for the boomers, it says, based on all these realities, and it even shows how the formation of the megachurch really kind of started to flow out of this key spiritual question of what is true. And if what is true is the key thing, then disseminating that truth is what we care most about. All of a sudden, you can start to see the last 50 years of church history coming down into this. And he says, if this was what was true, then what we need is really big auditoriums to fit a lot of people in to disseminate truth. And what are we going to drive everything off of? The metrics of how many people are accepting this truth. And as long as you accept the truth, the rest will take care of itself. Gen X comes along, and this was fascinating. They said Gen X was the single largest aborted generation in history. If they made it out alive, they probably had divorces were on the rise with the boomers at a larger rate than ever. Said in addition to that, they were the largest latchkey generation because if they had two parents, both were probably working. You have a generation with the Xers who, one, were quantumly smaller than the boomers that came before them and the millennials that came after them. They figured out pretty early on they were entirely on their own. And they have produced more unbelievable top-tier entrepreneurs than any other generation. Jack Dorsey from Twitter, Jay-Z, you look at, go through the list. It's crazy. Their key spiritual question was, what is real? Then you come to you and I, generally speaking, and it's the millennials who were overparented, overtrophied, overloved, overprotected, and we had adults involved in our lives at every level to try and correct for what some of the Xers had experienced. So we approach everything from the standpoint of almost this optimistic reality of like, I think we could really change the world. They at one point say, if you take their narcissism, which I think is such a great description of me and my generation, they said, unlike Gen X, the millennials love marketing because it feels like attention. And they actually need mentors because they're totally used to having adults around. And so they boil it down, and at one point they say, if you combine their desire to do good with their deep narcissism, Bono becomes their patron saint. And you're like, totally, that fits. And so the key spiritual question for the millennials is, what is good? I actually learned a ton about myself by going through this because what I realized, and this is the answer to your question, sorry for the long pathway.
I'm just thinking that because I'm a millennial, it's like so much in my head is the conversation of, is this good or bad?
That's it.
Not necessarily right or wrong.
That's right.
Good or bad.
And so what you run to, and this is what I realize when I'm on stage, and my gifting by God is not even necessarily teaching, it's exhortation, which means I can teach you what the Bible says, but every sermon that I have, you'll see start to really take on passion when it gets to, so what? What's the action step? What do we do? Why does this matter? And what I realize is the piece for me that's so critical is it good? Which is the key spiritual question for every millennial, right? Is it good? Is this good for human flourishing? Because if the gospel of Jesus Christ, if participation in Christian community, if discipleship and growth towards God and away from the things that are inherently not a part of his best for human flourishing, if that's not good, then what are we doing? And I've realized that like even my own story plays itself out in well, clearly the rest, I've spent a decent amount of my life trying everything else. Mm-hmm. So having run down a lot of the roads, getting to the point where I finally go, this has to be good for human flow. I've never found anything better.
Yeah.
And I've tried a lot of it. And so it was super informative for me, just even looking at, obviously there's some church history arc over the last 50 years, but even being able to, again, these aren't exhaustive. Not every baby boomer is like this, but from a generational formation understanding, you start to go, oh yeah. And I've sat with so many Gen Xers and had this generational conversation. And when we have it, they just go, that's exactly how I feel. Oh, okay. Well, I totally get it but for me, like, why am I on stage? What am I doing? What am I saying? I've had my life turned upside down by something that I found to be good. And to use that biblical analogy, I sold everything I had to buy the field that I found the treasure in.
Yep.
And of course, you're going to go out and tell people about that.
Yep.
Do I need everybody? I think this is one of the biggest beliefs about Christians that is untrue. I'm not paid on commission. I do not want you to believe in Jesus Christ because it's good for me. I think a lot of people think Christians are trying to change the world by getting enough people to believe in Jesus so that they'll be more comfortable in the world. The reality is, I was in a world where I was hurting and I was running after things that weren't working. Mm-hmm. A general love for humanity doesn't say change so that you'll make me comfortable. A general love for humanity says, I imagine you might be hurting too, even if on the exterior your BMW keys and your second home and your amazing family and all of these incredible things in your job say that you're not. I imagine, I guess, what I make up about your scenario is that you might still have hidden hurt under it all. And I know what my hidden hurt felt like. I would hate to miss an opportunity to tell you that I've found hope where there used to be hurt. So boiling it down, that's kind of call it the ethos of why I do what I do. People are hurting. It sucks. The other thing, I've had successful careers doing other things. I've never felt as fulfilled. And I don't think that, like, there are people who lead wildly fulfilling lives doing other things. I do feel like there was a specific kind of path that the Lord had for me that was, this is where it was going to land, and this is kind of what I feel called to do with my life.
Yeah.
So.
Totally, man. Well, maybe it is a generational thing because I relate a lot to that.
Yeah.
You know, like
it's driver for what you do.
Yeah, and when I
you've had successful careers.
I was talking about the other day. Like I actually had lunch with you on the day that I made the most money I ever had in my entire life. Yeah. Right, I bought you lunch. Took you to the Capitol Grill.
That was good stuff, man.
I made more than most people make in a year on this one day.
I remember.
And I probably went home and did something I shouldn't have done afterwards.
Well, I remember that season, just to the degree that I can give the outside perspective. You and I found kindred spirits around, technology and you know, just all sorts of different things that we loved. Mm-hmm. But the Austin that I experienced back here was extremely distracted, really disconnected from things. And again, I had no idea what was going on in the background, but I had a distracted, disconnected friend who was not passionate about his faith. It was a very back burner issue. And now I have a guy who is just on fire. The thing that's funny is, back then when I look at you and your life, you're a passionate person. Like, you're a pedal to the floor guy. And what I look at that's funny is the only thing you had really to put the pedal down on was work, and it just wasn't giving back to you in a fulfilling way. Yeah. So you just were so unfulfilled all the time. Yeah. And it's just so cool to see the flip in you from the listless, disconnected, passionless, into what I have now, which is like, I mean, we do the same thing in different context. And so to get to send clients your way, and it's just, what a 6 years it's been. Just a big celebration of kind of this season. It's been really cool.
Yeah, man, I appreciate that. And I never would have imagined that was possible, right? And what's interesting is, like, I think there are a lot of people, obviously, they can go out and make a ton of money and crush it, and they're fine with it. That wasn't me.
Well, and even and walk in the church and serve Christ, and I mean live. I mean, even from the church standpoint, I don't think it's like, well, get into ministry or you don't have a fulfilling life.
No,
I please don't hear that from me, because that's actually not how I feel. I have friends who are loving and leading and discipling and following Christ in passionate ways, and their day job is different than mine. I actually do make sure that I qualify, like, this is my day job.
Yeah.
You know, I've figured out what I love to do. It just happens that my day job is in ministry, working in a church. I have to preach sermons and do this and do that. So I don't ever want to make it sound like, well, this is the only way to be fulfilled. It's not the case at all. Yeah. It just happened to be that my day job is this. Yeah. And I enjoy it. So.
Yeah, man. All right, let's. So there's a handful of people on TikTok, live streaming. If you guys have any questions, again, this is Rustin Rossello. He's a friend of mine. He's a pastor at Scottsdale Bible Church here in Scottsdale, Arizona. If you have any questions about anything, we are happy to give our best answer, and you get what you pay for.
That's the best way to phrase it.
Yes.
Do my best.
While we allow a few minutes for any questions to come in, I'd like you just to land the plane with regard to, we'll say, like, the state of the church, right? What do you think is needed or required as your generation of leaders, right? You're in your early 40s, right? This is when people tend to rise up and settle into their spot, like you have and you are doing. I love the analogy of the church as a hospital, of kind of dismantling some of those rigid black, white, right, wrong things that the church has tended to produce in some contexts. What would you say? What newness is required in the church in the next, for your season of ministry, right? 20, 30 years. What's required?
It. Yeah. So you kind of think like my ministry window will kind of be, call it the next 20 years. I'm 41 years old. You figure by the time you get to your early 60s, you're starting to think, okay, I'm probably looking for a successor. I'm looking for someone to hand whatever I'm doing off to, whether that's a parachurch ministry, whether it's a church, whatever the thing is. And I think for me, the biggest thing that I see is churches that I'm seeing starting to flourish, of any size, right? Doesn't just mean like the goal of every church is not to become huge. That's silly, Yeah. Churches are profoundly impactful at any size, and they just exist in different areas and for different reasons, but all to serve the same purpose. And the biggest thing that I see is that over the next, I mean, it's happening now, but a continuation of this over the next 20 years is people aren't going to church the way they used to. And I don't mean like, oh, they show up once a month. I mean, it used to be an American reality that if you were a church-going American, you were there on a Sunday, you came back on Sunday night, and then you came back on Wednesday for a potluck prayer meeting. Mm-hmm. So, you got an hour and a half, you got another hour and a half, you got another 2 or 3 hours. So, I mean, you're talking now about a day's worth of your waking hours were spent at church with your church community. So to be at church was to be in the family. And I think one of the things that is happening now, kids, sports, all these different things, it just feels like the demands on everybody's time have just sort of escalated. I've got all of my people for maybe 2 hours a week, and that includes drive time.
Yeah.
Okay. You look at our lives. That's still probably our lives. Okay. So what gets really tricky about that is you go like just Scottsdale Bible as an example. Our values are super simple: transformational Bible teaching, engaging worship, authentic community, and service-based outreach. And we do all of that under the umbrella of grace. So that's how our values play out. And the best description for our values would be this. It's the precious cargo you take with you for the journey. So as we're going about our mission and our vision, these are the things that are dear to us that we put on the wagon. Best way to describe it, okay? If I want someone to experience each of our values, I don't have 3 days to do that, or a day and a night and another day. I have to help someone experience Bible teaching, worship, community, as well as outreach, all in the 2 hours on the Sunday morning, because they're not coming back. Yeah. And I might get them once a month, once a quarter, once a year. Yeah. So the thing that I'm probably most passionate about over the next 20 years is to make the Sunday morning experience a more care-based interaction and community mix by allowing people the opportunities, if not, I wouldn't call it the mandate, but maybe the expectation to care for each other or newcomers in the Sunday experience.
Yeah.
You were around for the years where Derek, myself, or Allie and myself were running the venue. We had a decent amount of freedom just because we were in the gym across the way. And once a quarter, if not once a month, twice a quarter, we always tried to pepper it in. We would, during the worship time, we'd say, hey, for the next 5 minutes, we just want you to find someone nearby, hear a little bit about their life, and we want you to pray for them. And it would happen. And slowly but surely, which you and Patty experienced this too, that room, which was not a small room, of 400 to 500 people at a time over, twice on Sunday, they started to know each other because everybody sits in the same spot. Mm-hmm. And so they started to get to know each other. And someone come back next week and be like, hey, Austin, how'd that interview go? I didn't get the job. Mm-hmm. Okay, just want you to know, I'm still praying for you guys. You let me know when the next one comes up, okay? And it was a shift.
Yeah.
Because people started to get to know each other. So then when you did a barbecue, the barbecue wasn't designed to create community. The barbecue was the engagement in the community you were already part of.
Yeah, strengthen the community.
So the biggest thing for me is over the next 20 years, churches have to become deeper, broader communities. Because right now, no great shock, you spend 2 hours drive time a week, you're not going to experience deep community. Well, everyone should get in a small group. Well, everybody should join a Bible study. Well, they're not. And so I got to work with what I got. And the biggest thing is, I think a Sunday morning has to be about so much more than, even the rhythmic, we showed up, intro video, 3 songs, announcements, sermon, announcements, see you next week. I mean, that model has been producing a come, listen, and leave reality for a good bit of time. You imagine if you're the person whose life is falling apart, struggling with an addiction, middle of a divorce, just lost a family member, suicidal, lonely, depressed, whatever your reality is, and you finally, after all these years, go, I'm out of hope. Mm-hmm. Somebody said church, I'm going to try it. Because now we're a post-Christian culture, which I'm not going to go into the definition, but we're not a nation driven by church attendance anymore. And we used to be, okay, which good or bad, leave it alone. But we're not a Christian culture anymore. So you have a lot of people who are growing up having never gone to church. That was not a reality 50 years ago. That was the vast minority. So now you have a lot of people who've never been to church, but some will show up. You imagine you've never been to a church before, you haven't been to one in a long time, whichever of those realities it is. You come in. You have no idea what you're in for, but you're so desperate and you're so scared and you're just so hurting, and a total stranger comes up, and in the midst of that morning, asks what's going on in your life. You finally get honest, and a total stranger prays for you. Mm-hmm. That'll change your life because somebody cared. I mean, you talk about seen, known, and loved all in that moment. You end up in this place where you go, I had no idea. And what's funny is, because of the way our churches operate right now, the person who's most scared is probably the person praying for you, because it's such an unpracticed reality. Mm-hmm. So we're actually doing something really unfair as leaders of our churches. We're looking at however many people are sitting in our church and going, well, we're not really giving you guys opportunities to practice this with each other on Sunday, but we're sure that you're doing it in the grocery store on Tuesday.
Yeah.
Come on. So my passion is just to have a Sunday morning experience where community is curated through care, and then call it evangelistic outreach is practiced with each other and then utilized during the week.
Yeah, man, I love that. All right, here's why I love that. One of the reasons why I love that. I was just in Casper, Wyoming this weekend for a spiritual development workshop, and I flew United because United's the only airline that goes in and out of Casper. I normally fly Southwest.
Okay.
The pilot gave the best pre-flight spiel I have ever heard.
Okay.
It was 5 minutes, and everybody listened to every word of it.
Got it.
The guy was funny. He was engaging. He wrapped it up by saying, if you've never flown United before, I want you to consider giving us your business, giving us the opportunity to earn your business. And if you're not happy with anything that happened on this flight, please come up to me in the cockpit when we land and tell me what happened, and I will personally see to it that this gets taken seriously. And for the first time, I considered, what might it look like to not fly Southwest?
Yeah.
My point is with what your vision is in the church is you want to give people that reason every week to hear what you're about and what you're calling them into, to give that touch point to say, hey, this might be the first and only time you get their ear for 2 hours, right? So you got to make the best of it. And it takes everybody in community to do that.
Yeah.
The second reason is I talk to a lot of people, and hardly any of them are in Arizona, right? And I tell people a lot. I offer one-on-one coaching or group coaching.
Yeah.
And I say, I'd love to work with you. Here's my fees. But the best thing for you would be to get in a community in real life with the people around you in your local geography.
That's great.
If I'm all you got, great.
Yeah.
Let's get started. And if you have any faith orientation or not, a church is or should be a place to get into community. So what might it look like for you to go into a church and say, hey, I need community. Can somebody here help me?
Yeah.
And I'll be honest, when I tell people that, I'm a little nervous because of what the church has done historically.
Yeah, that's right.
With creating the community.
Am I sending people to a safe place?
Totally.
Yeah, no, that's good.
And so I love hearing that, because I love the hospital. The church is a hospital mentality.
Right.
I learned that from the Conquer series. I don't know if you remember the guy in the Conquer series.
Yeah.
That's when I first heard it. But
Well, and here's the thing.
I hope more churches can do that.
Well, you think you're scared. I got 8 to 10,000 people on any given Sunday that I don't know where they're at, how they're doing, and I'm hoping that this. So again, it takes the training, it takes it takes casting that vision, and even still, you're going to have people who are hurting in their own lives. It excuses none of what they're going to do, but they may very well take this precious vision of care and tenderness, and because of what's going on in their life, or because they've just never chosen to change, one of those precious moments occurs and the person blows it up, blows them off. I mean, I've had some overtly corrective moments from the stage because what I heard came from the church body that I love and lead in a collaboration with the rest of our staff, behaved in a way that I was embarrassed of.
Yeah.
And we've had to have the guts in those moments to go, hey, church, real quick, this just happened. This is unacceptable. We can't behave this way. The city is hurting. And what the city got from us, I had one specific scenario where this happened. And I got up on stage after the service in front of 1,800 people and said, we did communion. And I said, nobody move when we're done with communion. And I prayed. And then we addressed it. And I said, this just happened in our midst. And I'm not okay with this.
Wow.
And I got both sides.
Yeah.
I got people who flooded with emails of thank you. And I had people who hit me with the, who do you think you are to talk to us this way?
Yeah.
And the reality was I probably lost some, followers that day, if you will, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
But I'm the shepherd.
Yep.
And I'm trying to keep all the sheep from biting each other or those new sheep who come into the flock. I can't have us eating the city alive. It's not okay. So it's a wacky reality. Church is messy and it's weird.
Totally. All right. So
do we get some?
It's 1:17. You get to 1:30?
I'm
cool.
good, man.
We got one question.
Great.
And this is a question I get a lot.
One brave person.
One brave person.
Thank you for your question.
Yeah, and this is somebody I know. She said, does his wife speak about her experience through this?
Good. Yeah.
And I'll give you my quick response to that, because you probably haven't heard it. But so far, my wife hasn't joined me in this, at least not this publicly on TikTok or the internet. She has joined me in some of the private groups and will continue to do that. This isn't her calling, to talk about her husband sexual perversion on the internet.
Yeah.
So will she ever join me? I don't know.
Totally.
But so how does your wife speak about her experience?
Yeah, she has. We have a massive women's ministry at Scottsdale Bible, and her and I have spoken about our past and our experiences together. We've done that in smaller group settings. To your point, my wife has a job that she does each and every day, and it's not in the public speaking arena. There are certainly women who do that and do it well. Lisa Turkhurst is an unbelievable example of that. There are others who, that they feel a call to ministry, or they feel a call to care, to recovery, to those things. My wife does that when her and I feel like that ministry setting is fitting for the two of us, but I wouldn't say it's something that she does all the time. There are certain people who we get involved with and the wife is really hurting, and at the same time, this sounds silly, I feel the need. Men aren't the only people who cheat.
Totally.
And so, a lot of this lands on my couch, and it quite honestly happens in an equal ratio. It's about a 50-50 share.
Yeah.
So there are often individuals who will be counseling a couple, and the husband will need to hear from my wife because he was the offended party. And, you know, we got friends on both sides of
Totally.
it. And both of our stories are important. Mine gets a tremendous amount of attention just because it's the one that's told a lot. But it's never told without the, you know, I mean, again, God showed up through the hero of my wife. So it's never been, and she's never shy about doing it when necessary. Though I would say my wife is an introvert. She's an outgoing introvert. She has, you know, she's in sales. So it's not like she
doesn't wake up in the morning and say, hey, I want to go talk about this.
She's not fed by time with people,
Yeah.
though she does it. She's fed by time with family or fed by time with me or others. So it's just kind of funny because she is more introverted as well as she's far more private. So a lot of mine and her navigation of things, even in sermon examples, is, you know, this last week when I shared what I shared in my sermon, her and I talked about it ahead of time, and details in particular are something that we guard just because, boy, it really starts to open up the personal. So that sermon example was crafted in collaboration with the two of us so that it was honoring to what God has called us to, because our lives are not our own, while still making sure that Jamie is not drug into the public sphere and still very much feels, yes, let's serve God with this, but let's guard the details so that there are some private, intimate things that are ours, because this is private and intimate. So
yeah, cool. I love that. Two more questions. Besides a church, where else can men find a positive support community? And by the way, if you do have a question, we'll have a few more minutes here. Feel free to put it in the comments on TikTok.
Yeah.
So besides a church, where else can men find positive support community?
Yeah. You know, I think it's a lot of different things. Like if you say, okay, I'm looking for something outside of the church, that's awesome. You're now going to probably hedge towards an affinity-based group. You need to find some guys. I mean, the amount of guys who you walk into a coffee shop and, you know, they're 70, 80 years old. They're just sitting around having coffee every morning. And you just go, they're there. One of them's doing a crossword. The other one's reading the sports page, and they're talking about life, complaining about politics.
News, sports, and weather.
It's awesome, man. But they'll talk about stuff, and they'll go deep. I think if you're going to say, where do men find it? I don't think it's where do men find it. It's where do you find the men? I mean, and here's the deal. It's hard. Like bar rooms are set up. Bars are set up shoulder to shoulder. Coffee shops are set up face to face because women do face to face and men do shoulder to shoulder. Yep. It's finding something that you want to get involved with other men to be able to start opening up some transparency and some relationship. To be honest, one of the things, and I don't know how old the person who asked the question is, but at the end of the day, I don't necessarily need to, but generally, the younger we are, the harder our social skills are. We're just not as good at closing the deal socially as we used to be. It used to be that you get to know people, you knew your neighbor, you know, exchange stuff, and then slowly but surely you kind of became friends. I think the younger generations are way more willing, like call it me, even though I'm 41, but like the rest of my generation, the next generation, we're way more willing to go deep. We're terrible at getting into the front end of it. So it's like once you're forced into a relationship, we'll throw our whole guts up.
Yeah.
We're just terrible at getting into relationships. Couples are this way too. It's just go close the deal. Go ask for a date. Yeah. Take them out. Do a couples thing together. And people are so lonely because that skill,
courage,
really fallen off.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
It's hard to take the first step.
So I would say affinity-based groups are probably a good bet. Finding things that you have in common. If you go to the gym, start talking to people. Ask for a spot. You see what flows out of that.
Yeah.
Make friends. If you have kids, sports teams, target-rich environment, you're going to spend 4 months trapped with these same families. Find one you like. Start talking. See if something up. But then when the time comes, don't be afraid to say, hey, do you want to get together?
Yeah.
Like sometime, you want to grab lunch this week? I'd love to. And this is what guys are good at. Hey, I'd love to run a few things by. I just need a sounding board. Is there any way? Guys love to give advice. Mm-hmm. We love to fix. We love to talk. So just use that to your advantage and ask for input. That's probably the best way. When it came to, this is a bad example, but probably a great example. When it came to dating, you always knew the best way to connect with a woman was to be gentler, softer, more playful, fun, talk about deeper things, and you could start to kind of curate more relationship, because women tended to be more on the emotional side, appreciating those emotional experiences. And it's not that they were only emotional, but just those were more attractive. So you did things together. You were, for guys love at the entry level of relationships to give input. Mm-hmm. Men love to be the expert. Put a guy in the expert chair and just, hey, I just want to run. You got things going on in your life? Ask for input. Hey, I'm struggling at work and I would just love some input. This has happened, this happened, this happened.
Yeah, so it's not necessarily the where do you find it. It's the how do you need to reposture yourself,
right,
to
it's already going on around you.
Totally, yeah. All right, another one. How would you suggest helping someone into the church community who has had issues with the church?
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah,
the church is it's a moving target. Usually, okay, so I'm gonna fumble around.
How many hours do you want to spend on this question?
I know. Listen, so many people have been hurt by the church. Okay, so here would be one of the more powerful things I could do today. On behalf of all the churches who have hurt people, as a member of, the pastorate, the clergy, whatever, I want to apologize for church cultures that have been toxic. I want to apologize for pastors who've been manipulative. I want to apologize for congregants who've been legalistic and pharisaical, who have been hypocritical. I want to apologize for sinful behavior that has hurt others. And to the degree that I can own some of the historical realities, to maybe open a door that says there are churches out there that you can come back to hear about the hope and the love of Jesus Christ, I want to extend that apology because it's real. And I think that's part of it, to recognize that church culture has changed a lot in the last 20, 25 years. A lot is different, and there are churches. I mean, again, I work at a fairly large church. I could name 5 or 6 churches in the city that I love and adore that are safe, just to come back to and to hear about the love and the hope. Sometimes Christians are the worst representation of Christ, and it's just a bummer, but it tends to be true. So how do you go about doing it? 1, identify what hurts. Okay. So, hey, I felt betrayed. I felt unsafe. I felt this, I felt that, and identify those things. And, step 1, going back to your courage thing. After you've identified some of those things that hurt, now you're going to go back and you're going to take the risky step of Young Life has this great phrase, come and see. Mm-hmm. Come and see if God is good. And you're looking for something to resonate in your heart, assuming, again, if you've been hurt by the church, you've been in a church. I am hoping that not every experience you had in that church was terrible. Mm-hmm. They may have all been tarnished by something bad that happened. Are there good things? Is there a nostalgic feeling of home in some of your church experience? Can you sit back in some of those and hope that you find those things again, but without the obvious trauma or the obvious hurt or pain? Because to miss out on the rest of your life in a pursuit or engagement, because Hebrews is really good. It says, don't forsake the assembly, right? There's something really powerful that happens in the connection time, in the community time. And that's where, hey, people say all the time, well, I can follow Christ without going to church. And you go, you can pursue a relationship with Jesus without going to a church. But there's something in that community aspect that is so powerful and so important that the Bible actually points us towards it, even though it's by far the messiest part of the Christian life, without a doubt. It's not discipleship. It's not big churchy word sanctification. It's not our lives looking more like Jesus every day as we walk forward with all the ups and the downs and the bumps and the bruises. It's the mess of the people. us being included in that. It's my mess when it collides with your mess.
I've never seen a time where you take two imperfect people and put them together,
Right,
and everything works great.
right. Well, that's why Paul says
it doesn't happen.
he talks about marriage in Ephesians 5 and then says it's a profound mystery, and then chose to never do it himself. So he tells you everything you need to know about marriage and two people. So.
There you go. All right, so we'll say last question.
Okay.
And again, this is on my TikTok, which is Porn Coach, so we got a lot of that.
That's great.
The question is, what is Rustin's number one recommendation healing from betrayal trauma? What is your number one recommendation for a woman healing from betrayal trauma?
Healing from betrayal trauma. Oh my gosh, that's such a good question. It deserves such a great answer, and I'm going to try and give you the best I have. So,
get what you pay for.
But I'm free, and I'm worth what you paid for. That's right. Okay, so here's the biggest thing. What I see so many times in recovery, male or female, right? People tend to respond in one of two ways right off the bat. You either have the person who goes, oh my gosh, it's not a big deal, I forgive you, let's go. Okay? Or you have the you mother, and off you go. And both have a miss, because this one stores a tremendous amount of pain and hurt, okay? And it just gets bottled up, and it doesn't ever get expelled, so it just sits there and festers. And as time moves on, that's got to come out. But the individual, now the offended party now has offense in them that never got exhausted. And so they may be 4, 5, 6, 10 years down the road and can't figure out, why can't I give my heart to you? Why can't I give my heart to you? Why can't I give my heart to you? And sometimes it can be that unresolved anger and resentment and pain and frustration, all of which, by the way, is completely understandable based on where they are. The best definition for injustice that I've ever heard was that somebody else's sin got dumped onto your plate. Okay? Your husband or your wife's mess got dumped into your life, and it has to be processed and moved out. Otherwise, what do you're just carrying their sin around in your life. And so that side does that. The other side gets angry, but usually I'll say this side tends to recover better because they just throw it up, and it may not come out well, but it comes out. And so the biggest thing that I would say, what's the biggest recommendation, biggest resource? Find a place where you can be fully angry. Be upset and get into the real raw emotion. Some of us, and people who are high mercy, high grace, just in their lives, their personality wires that way. They tend to go towards, and they don't mean to, but typically addiction will find an enabler. I don't care who you are. If you're an addict, you'll find an enabler somewhere. So they may not even realize it, but most of these offended parties, in some way, shape, or form, have been leaned on in such a way in regards to sex or anything like that, assuming we're talking about pornography. In some way, they've been leaned on, and in some way have been forced to or chosen to kind of enable. So their whole connection to this individual usually has some sort of performance aspect to it. So when the disclosure moment happens, in some cases, it feels like the Super Bowl. I got to perform at the highest level now. And so with that being the case, gosh, I got to really get going. And then they say the thing that they know they want to say, which is, it's okay. But it's not okay. It was not okay. It was never okay. This isn't what you signed up for. This is not what they signed up for. This is not what the two of you said the rules would be. The rules have been broken, and that should create discomfort, and that should create pain, and that should create response. And if those things don't come out, you're going to carry it. So the biggest thing I would say is getting into, and it goes all the way back to where we started, getting honest about what hurts, how it's hurting, and this would be the key, and what are you afraid of?
Yep.
If you can't do those things, the biggest The biggest miss I see people make is on the most extreme side. Well, yeah, we kind of talked about it, but then that was it. Yeah, that ain't it for what it's worth. Like, you're going to have to get in and heal two hearts. One heart is going to like, hey, okay, so yeah, it would, no. And on the other side, I know, you're going to have to get with counselors, and you're going to have to find a new reality with each other. Because, like, the best thing somebody said, we landed on a couple's couch that night when everything exploded, and after the office that day. And the guy looked over at me and he said, Rustin, your marriage is over. And I was like, what are you doing to me, man? Like, I'm trying to figure out how are we going to hold this thing together. And he goes, what I mean by that is the marriage that you had is gone.
Yeah.
It does not exist anymore. It has been blown up and burnt to the ground. If you make it out of this, what you will create is something entirely new, which is great news to you guys because neither of you really liked your old marriage. Mm-hmm. And it was like the most horrifying thing I'd ever heard and the most hopeful thing I'd ever heard. And in order for something new to occur, you almost have to completely let go of what it was. And infidelity, and again, I think pornography is always kind of in the mix. Betrayal, let's just call it betrayal. Yeah. And I would call pornography betrayal, right? It betrays the sense of unity and relationship that the entity of marriage or dating or however it exists really held on to. And so once that's been blown up, if there isn't a best place to get honest, so when I say a resource, it could be a counselor. Don't go to a family member. And I'm just saying, as an ongoing, they could be supportive. They're not going to be able to do the heavy lifting. You need an objective party. Because only an objective party is going to be able to help you unown their stuff and to help you own your stuff. Because there's stuff on the offended side that goes, what do you mean I can't, for an example, not exhaustively true. What do you mean that's codependency? No, I love him or I love her. And you go, there's no boundaries in this love. Boundless love is dependency, and that doesn't tend to function well because this codependency says I'm only okay if you're okay. And off we go. So all that said, biggest resource I would give is just find a safe, probably a professional place to truly get honest and somebody who's trained to help you find that internal healing so that we're actually working towards healing, not we're just working towards kind of being okay. It's not okay, right? Yep. So I don't know.
Yeah, man, that's great. I love hearing you say all this stuff because it's validating for me, right? I've been doing this on TikTok for 6 months.
Yeah,
it's so consistent with what I say, right?
Good.
I boil all that down into saying
it's nice to have a partner in crime.
It's exactly, yeah. It's you got to be in community with what's going on the inside.
Yeah.
What do I mean by community? Journaling, therapy, counseling, coaching, church, recovery group, whatever. Yeah. Get what's inside outside.
That's right.
And that begins your journey.
Totally.
It is so hard and messy.
Yeah.
But it takes courage to be on the path. All right. So this is great. I really appreciate you being here.
I loved it.
Yes, this will be replayed. Somebody said, I find so much hope in that now, but it destroyed me at first knowing everything I knew is over.
Yeah.
What came to mind for me, I've been married for 12 years.
Yeah.
But I say it's really been 2 6-year stints. We had the first 6-year marriage that was terrible.
Total reboot.
And this new 6-year marriage that's amazing.
Yeah.
So hard to grasp, right, when I was in the moment of like, what does that look like? But when people ask, like, I just want things to go back to normal.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert, not going back to normal. You get the opportunity to make a new normal for yourself.
Well, and even more haunting question, do you?
Yeah, totally.
Just remember, normal had him or her bathing in pornography or adultery, and you living in the dark or in denial.
Yep.
Do you really want normal again? Mm-hmm. And the biggest thing, this is what I always say, the hardest part in every restoration road is when you're stuck in the middle, because it is nauseating to think about going backwards into the life that you had, and it is terrifying to think about going forward into the unknown.
Yeah.
You're stuck between nausea and terror. And that is the restoration road.
Yeah.
It's the place where you go, I can't go back to the life I had. And I'm so afraid of what the life forward will look like.
Yep.
And so that's it. I mean, talk about just a hellacious calling. Is the Lord's trying to create a new normal. And the hope is that that it's worth living.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, man. Well, I'm so grateful for you being here. 6 years it's been since I made that call to you.
Huge. Yeah.
Chose something new in my life.
Yeah.
And what a journey it's been. Yeah. Very grateful. And again, I would hope everybody is left with inspiration to change, to choose something new, to choose a new, flourishing, hopeful path in life. And with that, thanks, Rustin.
You bet,
we
man.
did it.
Thanks for having me.
All right, man.